Hey folks, today we are going to be reacting to some of the world's most famous photos. As a photographer, I don't really know that much about the world's most famous photos or famous photographers for that matter, and I really want to change that. So I pulled a very simple basic list from the internet here for our first video today. I want to keep doing this series. I think I'm going to do this video in two parts so it doesn't get too long, and hopefully we can learn something together. So I've got my laptop here, so I'll be looking off to the side. Without further ado, let's get into our first photo. Okay, so moving into our first photograph is one that I totally expected to see on this list, to be honest, and one that I know a tiny bit about. This is the Afghan Girl photograph by Steve McCurry. It was shot on Kodachrome slide film, a film that Kodak unfortunately no longer produces. And you can see that it has very beautiful, rich, saturated colors. There's also been a care from the photographer also to, kind of create this duotone palette there. So just everything about this image is very striking, very beautiful. The lighting, very soft gradient. I really love this image, and it's a bit of a weird thing to say how beautiful it is, knowing that it comes with a tragic backstory, being that the girl photographed here was made a refugee into Pakistan from Afghanistan, where there was the Soviet invasion in the 1980s. So I can see why it's on this list. You can probably see why it's on this list. It's very beautiful, very emotional, very striking. I think that's what makes it a great photograph. Yeah, just weird to say, I guess how beautiful I really do think this image is, knowing that it has such a tragic backstory. But I guess within documentary photography, maybe within photography in general, that is often what makes for a great photograph. I don't know much else about this photo, to be honest, so I won't ramble on. However, I will tack up a little bit of information at the end of this photo, as I will for each photo. So just to cover anything that I find interesting that I might have missed, or things that I might have got wrong also. So we can learn something together. But yeah, moving on. Okay, so moving on to our next photo, we have a war photograph here, black and white, shot on film. I do know that this was shot by Robert Capa, and that's about as close as to what I know about it. I honestly don't even know whether he photographed during World War I or World War II. I'm gonna guess World War I, just judging by the rifle and lack of helmet. That's about all I have to go on. I'm not a gun guy though, so I can't even, stand on that guess as an educated one. The other small thing I do know about this image is that this man, this soldier, was apparently just shot. And that's what is apparently supposed to make this an amazing image. And if that is true, then obviously I think that holds pretty firm. However, I did read an article, and I don't remember where I read it, and I don't know how much credibility there was to where I read it, but I have heard that this image might have been staged. For me personally, I don't think that really matters too much. I think the idea of this image, and probably what it's trying to portray in the documentary sense, is obviously the sadness and horror of war, much similar to our first image that we've reviewed there. And if it did that job for a lot of people, then maybe this image is quite successful. Either way, I don't know whether that to be true or not. I do like this image, looking at it from purely like a technical standpoint. It's sort of an interesting composition. You could argue that the composition could be a little bit better. However, if it really was taken in the moments of war, and was not staged, then I don't think you really have that much time to consider composition, etc. But I do like the movement, obviously. If the story is true and this soldier, was a casualty of war, then it obviously makes it quite a sad image. And one that's sort of hard to look at and feels weird to be judging it on a technical point of view and saying whether it's a great photo or not when there's a very human figure in the image who may have lost a life during war. So moving on. So moving into our third image here, and I'm starting to sense a little bit of a trend of sad imagery. I do know that this was also shot during the Great Depression. By Diane Arbus, and what looks to be a portrait of a family, so a mother and two kids. That's close to about all I know about it. I also know that there was controversy surrounding this image also. I think it came a lot later, a lot of time after this image was photographed, that the woman in the image here was not so happy due to some, I think, legal reasons. Maybe was it like publishing rights or how much sort of money and fame that Diane had then, garnered off this image, from what she was seeing. For some reason, there seemed to be some unhappiness in how this image was portrayed and after it being shot. So I don't know further details on that. Again, I'll flash them up for you. As for the actual image, technically, I think it's extremely beautiful. I do like the presentation of the three figures to the kids who are turned away, which is an interesting way to present a portrait of a family, to be able to obscure the faces of children. I don't know if they were that wary about legal things back then, but even to think about it in today's standards, where we have the legal rights protecting children and their images before they're 18 and before they can sign waivers, etc. It's an interesting way to present a photo, and I think it just still tells the story and puts focus onto the mother. And there's obviously what looks like a lot of emotion and pain and thought on the face of the mother here. And otherwise I do like the image a lot. Again, even though it probably has a very sad and tragic story behind it, I think it's a very beautiful photo, very striking. And I think it has a very good reason as to why it's on this list. So moving on. Okay, so our fourth image, one that as a street photographer I kind of have to be familiar with. This image shot by Henri Cartier-Bresson on black and white film. I don't know where it's shot, and I believe that it is famous mostly because of the choice of composition here, and then maybe the movement of the cyclist. I think it's a nice image. I do think it might be has more historical value because of the choice of composition. I think Henri Cartier-Bresson was one of the early users of things like the rule of thirds, and really considered obviously the decisive moment, as he wrote about, which is basically a moment in street photography when you choose to snap the shutter. And I think this image is one representation of that, as he has many, and to be honest, I think many better ones. Maybe there's something that I'm missing here. I like the image, don't get me wrong. I don't even think it's his best image, so why it would be on this list over some of his others, I'm not entirely sure, but it's here. I like it. Has nice movement, doesn't make me feel much. It's pretty, doesn't have much of a story for me. Maybe there's a bigger one. If there is, you'll know about it in a second. And that's about all I have to say about it, so moving on. Fifth image here is a portrait of Steve Jobs. I know this photo, and that's all I know about it. I think it's a nice portrait. Don't have much else to say. Obviously, it holds some significance because of Steve Jobs being a famous figure, apparently quite the innovator. Apparently that's a controversial take. Also, don't know a lot about Steve Jobs. I'm not a huge Apple fanboy. I use some of their products. Never really cared too much else about the story behind the product, which is, well, the usual case with me and things that I use, to be honest. It's a nice portrait. Doesn't seem like anything that I couldn't take myself with a nice studio light. And that's, to be honest, about it. I will try to find some information for you so that's not so boring. Does it excite me? No, not really. But I also don't know a lot about Steve Jobs. I think it's a nice enough portrait. Seems to present him roughly, honestly, how I've kind of seen what little bits of him I had seen in the media, etc. That's about it. Moving on. Now onto our sixth image here, which is, I'm sure, one that you have seen before. It is a bunch of construction workers sitting on a construction beam very high up in the skyline across what looks like New York City, judging by what I think is Central Park in the background there. I don't know when it was taken. I believe this might be taken at the construction of the Empire State Building, which makes it pretty cool historically. As for the photo, it's okay. Just not the most amazing composition, but obviously the subject basically speaks for itself in this one, so not really too worried about that. I think it's a pretty cool image. It's also really hard with these ones that you've seen so much. They feel like postcards, and you've seen them so much that they kind of start to, you get a little bit desensitized to them. So I don't know. I kind of remember the first time that I actually saw this image and I thought it was so cool. I also do remember reading something about the fact that this also might have been staged. Not that like they weren't there, they were sitting there, but that they wouldn't do this on a regular day and go out and sit there. Of course, now when you actually think about it, when they're building a building, they probably just sit on the floor of the building and eat their lunch, not hanging over the city skyline, risking their lives to eat their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But yeah, it's a cool image. I really like it. It has a good feeling to it. Don't really know what else to say. Something that's, yeah, on a postcard or something like that. Super cool. But I think that's all about what I would sort of have to say for it. It looks cool. I like it. Gives me a good feeling. And I can see why it's on this list. Historically, I can see why it's on this list. Is it an amazing photograph? Nah, it could be argued. But yeah, I like it. And before this video gets too long, I am going to chop it into two parts. So we've done 6 photos here today. I'm going to do another 6 in the next video. So if you're watching this and it's super fresh, hit that subscribe button because part 2 is on the way. If part 2 is already out, go and check that out and hit the subscribe button before you do that too. I hope you learned something today. I hope you had fun. I certainly did. And I will catch you in the next one. Peace.